Look at your energy bill this month. Now look at the price of fuel at the pump. Most people think those numbers are driven by supply and demand. But right now, in April 2026, there is a drone flying somewhere over Russian territory, and it is aimed directly at an oil refinery that supplies 30% of Moscow's gasoline. What if the most important economic event of this year is not happening on Wall Street, but a drone assembly line in eastern Ukraine? Today, we're going to look at the last 15 days of the Russia-Ukraine war. Not the body counts, not the maps. The structure underneath, the incentives, the strategic logic, and what it tells us about where this is all heading.
Every week, someone declares a winner in this war. Russian media says Russia is winning. Western media says Ukraine is holding. Both are missing the point. Russia is advancing almost nothing on the ground, but it is destroying Ukraine's power grid systematically. Ukraine is intercepting 9 out of 10 drones, but cannot stop a single ballistic missile. This is not a war of conquest anymore. It is a war of exhaustion, and both sides know it. Strategic layer, what the media misses. When a military analyst, Michael Kaufman, says the front has turned into a much more blurred zone, where the ability of either side to achieve an operational breakthrough disappears, he is describing something profound. This war has entered a phase where conventional military logic no longer determines the outcome.
For 3 years, Russia struck Ukraine's power grid. Ukraine lost 60% of its generating capacity, from 33.7 gigawatts down to roughly 14. But something changed in early 2026. Ukraine began striking back, not at military targets, but at Russian oil infrastructure. In just the last few weeks, Ukrainian long-range drones hit the Yaroslavl refinery near Moscow, the Ust-Luga and Primorsk Baltic export terminals, and the Novorossiysk Caspian terminal. The result? Russian oil exports dropped 43% in 1 week alone, an estimated $1 billion in lost revenue in 7 days. This is not tactical. This is strategic economic warfare.
Here is what nobody is covering. For the first time in this war, Ukraine is now launching more long-range drones into Russia than Russia is launching into Ukraine. In March 2026, Ukraine deployed over 7,000 long-range systems, reaching targets 1,500 kilometers deep inside Russian territory. And Ukraine has systematically destroyed roughly half of Russia's operational Panzer air defense systems since early 2026. When you remove the shield, every drone becomes a threat. Russia's rear is no longer safe.
Says he's spoken to both Putin and Zelensky. Peace talks are in the air. But look at the incentives carefully. Putin feels more confident than ever on the battlefield and believes he can wait. Zelensky cannot give up territory without losing domestic legitimacy. Trump wants a deal before 2026 midterms. Europe is marginal to the diplomacy, as one senior analyst put it, despite being Ukraine's largest financial backer. Everyone is negotiating, and nobody is negotiating in good faith.
Let's stop looking at what each side says and look at what each side needs. Russia needs time. Its military-industrial complex is producing at record levels, but its losses are also record level. Over 1.3 million total casualties since 2022. The economy is under strain. A ceasefire that freezes the front lines gives Russia a chance to rearm and return later, which is exactly why Ukraine cannot accept it without security guarantees. Ukraine needs the energy war to work fast. If Ukrainian strikes continue to degrade Russian oil revenue, Moscow's ability to fund the war shrinks. But Ukraine's own power grid is at its lowest capacity since the invasion began. Every winter buys Russia a new weapon, the cold. The United States needs an exit that doesn't look like a defeat. Trump's instinct is transactional. He wants a deal. Any deal. But his own envoy, Steve Witkoff, was reportedly coaching Russia on how to pitch Putin's position to Trump. That is not diplomacy. That is theater. China is watching quietly. Beijing called Trump to discuss both Taiwan and Ukraine in the same conversation. That is not a coincidence. China understands that a U.S. distracted by Europe cannot fully commit to the Pacific, and is calculating accordingly. Russia's 19th Motorized Rifle Division just canceled all leave until May 9, not because of a Ukrainian offensive, but out of concern about ongoing Ukrainian operations. When the aggressor cancels leave in its own rear, something has shifted in the psychological balance of the war.
World War I, Britain did not defeat Germany on the battlefield alone. It imposed a naval blockade that cut off German access to food, fuel, and raw materials. By 1918, Germany's home front had collapsed, not because it lost a battle, but because it could no longer sustain the war economically. Ukraine, in 2026, is attempting something structurally similar, but with drones instead of warships. The target is not the German coast, but Russian oil refineries, export terminals, and energy infrastructure. If the cumulative damage to Russian energy infrastructure now exceeds Russia's capacity to repair and replace it, as some analysts suggest, then we may be witnessing the slow-motion beginning of an economic blockade from the air. Whether it works depends on one thing: time. And time depends on whether Trump lets Ukraine keep fighting, or forces a deal that hands Russia the recovery window it needs. In World War I, Britain did not defeat Germany on the battlefield alone. It imposed a naval blockade that cut off German access to food, fuel, and raw materials. By 1918, Germany's home front had collapsed, not because it lost a battle, but because it could no longer sustain the war economically. Ukraine, in 2026, is attempting something structurally similar, but with drones instead of warships. The target is not the German coast, but Russian oil refineries, export terminals, and energy infrastructure. If the cumulative damage to Russian energy infrastructure now exceeds Russia's capacity to repair and replace it, as some analysts suggest, then we may be witnessing the slow-motion beginning of an economic blockade from the air. Whether it works depends on one thing: time. And time depends on whether Trump lets Ukraine keep fighting, or forces a deal that hands Russia the recovery window. Here is the connection most analysts skip. Russian oil exports fell 43% in 1 week. Russia is one of the world's largest oil exporters. When Russian supply is disrupted at that scale, global oil markets move, energy prices move. And when energy prices move, everything else follows: food transportation costs, manufacturing costs, inflation. At the same time, Europe is now spending at record levels on this, redirecting capital from social programs and infrastructure. The EU is manufacturing 2 million artillery shells per year and has multi-billion euro procurement programs running. That money comes from somewhere. And then there is the technology shift. The drone war in Ukraine is the world's largest live experiment in autonomous warfare. The Atlantic Council describes what is coming as a compute war, where AI, autonomous systems, becomes more than soldiers. Every defense company, every AI lab, every government on Earth is studying what is happening right now in eastern Ukraine. The technologies being tested will define the next decade of global security spending, and that shapes investment flows, industrial policy, and geopolitical alliances for years to come. You do not need to be in Ukraine to be affected by this war. You just need to live in a world where energy prices, defense budgets, and AI development matter.